Welcome back to the On Adventure podcast. I'm Josh Self, and I'll be your host. I love doing this podcast because I get to meet people from all different walks of life, and it's become very clear that adventure looks different for everyone. My next guest I've known for a really long time. He's a friend. He's also my business partner, and it just took a couple minutes into our conversation for him to bring up stuff that I had no idea about his life, and that's one of the things that is really cool about doing this. I think you're going to really enjoy the conversation. So without further ado, here's Mike Perkins. All right, Mike Perkins, welcome to the On Adventure podcast.
Well, thank you, Josh. It's a real honor to be amongst the incredibly gifted and talented people you've interviewed before.
Yeah, there's been some pretty cool ones on here. I was looking back over the list this morning, and a lot of these folks I've known for a while. Some of them I haven't, but the neat part about it is I've come to call them the everyday explorer. It's the people that they go to work every day just like us, but they find ways to push themselves and challenge and learn, and sometimes on purpose and sometimes not. But I am interested to hear your story. And for anybody that doesn't know who you are, which is probably very few people, because you and Barbara seem to know everybody. You and I have worked together for over 20 years at this point.
More than 20.
I mean, it was a little before Eli was born, and he will be 20 in a couple months. Mm-hmm. So
I remember that.
I remember the baby gift that you gave us after he was born. I think it had something to do with like rubber gloves and some goggles, which was funny.
Yeah, because boys, you have to be careful.
You never know.
Changing those diapers, the goggles especially.
You got to be careful. Yep. So you and I have known each other for a long time. We've been legal business partners for many years at this point. And some of these stories that I'm going to try to explore with you, I think I've heard maybe 1 or 2 or 12 times, but they're good. And the reason I ask you to do this is because I think with the theme and target of this podcast, what I'm trying to get out of it, I think you've got something to add to it. So I appreciate you being here.
I'm glad to be here. Not sure what's going to come out of my mouth, but we're going to find out.
Isn't that kind of like every day with you? Like
Exactly.
Not sure what's going to come out.
Yep.
And Barbara's rolling her eyes right about now.
Yeah, be careful what you ask for.
Okay. Well, let's start from the beginning. And you, like my dad, grew up in the Virginia Beach area, Norfolk to be specific. Is that correct?
Yes. My mom and dad were actually met in Norfolk, Virginia. Mom was from eastern North Carolina, small town in Bertie County called Allander. My dad was from Union County, another in North Carolina near Charlotte, which is another small town named Marshville. And the dad had gone into the Navy right after he graduated from high school, and he was discharged before World War II, but because of an eye injury he suffered on a battleship when they were training. And so he was located there, and he was introduced to Mom when she was finished high school and moved to Norfolk to begin her career. And one of her friends from the hometown of Allander introduced the two, and they were married. And so they were married, and my brother was born in 1944.
Were they pretty young?
Well, Dad was born in 1920, so I guess when you say young, they got married around 1942.
Okay.
So not so young.
Youngish.
22, 20. Yeah. Mom was 2 years younger. But anyway, they managed to produce a child named David. He's my brother. And then after World War II was over, I was born in 1946. And the interesting thing about that was my dad, even though he was discharged from the Navy with a disability, and it was a lifetime disability, he couldn't see out of one of his eyes. But he was drafted into the Army around 1943, 44, and actually ended up in Germany as a result of his specialty. Since he was disabled and he couldn't see, he could still drive a Jeep. And so he was assigned to an engineering corps that would follow the battle as these guys are moving across Europe, France, and then into Germany and Belgium, Holland. And they would survey the battle damage that was left behind as the front kept moving. And those vehicles that were salvageable, they'd say put a tag or something on them, or they'd take them back to the moving motor pools, and they'd repair them and stick them back in the battle. It could be a tank, it could be a Jeep, it could be some other piece of equipment that could be repaired and sent back in the battle. So he was there at the end of World War II when the Germans surrendered.
All right, so let me interrupt you because you've already said something I didn't even know about you. That first of all, how did he get the injury on the battleship?
He was a gunner's mate. And if you know what battleships are like, especially this was a New Jersey class battleship. He was I think it was on New York, so it was a pretty good sized battleship. Anyway, those things are those turrets are so, and the guns are so big, 16-inch guns, that they have to bring up the shells and the propellant up from deep inside the ship. And some of that stuff's explosive. And I think there was a mishap as the thing came up from the belly of the ship.
Oh, wow.
And some that exploded. Might have killed some people. I'm not certain about that. But still, he suffered shrapnel damage to his optic nerve on his right eye. And he couldn't see out of his eye.
Was it something he wasn't interested in talking about?
He told us a little bit about it, but, they didn't really. A lot of World War II veterans don't share a lot of information unless you ask them. But you have to really ask them when you're in the right mood. And Dad was basically, he worked a lot, and we went to school, and so, rarely did we sit down and talk about stuff like that. And I'm disappointed that I never did that.
Yeah.
But
so when he got drafted back to, not to the front lines, but he wasn't far from the front lines.
No.
I would imagine if he's going through, did he survey some of the battlefields that we would have known about?
I would say that I don't know exactly when he arrived over into Europe. He was not part of the landing force. My guess is he probably maybe 30 days beyond that. And once the front moved off the beaches and back into France and started moving towards the west, and my guess is he was maybe as much as 20 to 30 miles behind the front at times. I know he carried a Thompson submachine gun with him because I think he brought it back from the war.
Oh, my God.
I remember seeing that when we visited his hometown, the homestead, family homestead, and up in the attic one time we were moseying around, we found,
like, what is this?
An automatic weapon. Because a lot of GIs brought their stuff back. And so I guess he was supposed to turn it in, but
probably so.
Probably worth keeping. I wish I had it now.
Do you have any idea what happened to it?
No. Maybe they turned it in finally. But when I was about a 6-year-old or something like that, I remember seeing something like that.
Well, the other thing that comes to mind, too, is I guess I've watched enough of these World War II movies, thanks to Hudson at this point, that I would imagine I saw like some pretty gruesome things.
Yeah, and that's the part we didn't talk about.
Never talked about
No, I think a lot of people didn't.
Yeah.
But I do know a number of World War II veterans, that, especially one that was in the hometown of where my mom grew up. He lost his leg, and he was a friendly guy. He lived only about a block or so away from my grandparents lived. So when we visited in the summertime, we go down and see JW, and he'd be whittling something or sitting on his front porch. He was fully disabled, and that's pretty much what they lived off of. He also taught us how to eat radishes, which I never liked, but he said, try this.
Yeah.
He's a nice man.
Do you recall any ways that it, like now that you look back on growing up with your dad, that those experiences affected him, or did he literally compartmentalize it and just move on into life?
Since he didn't fight on the front line, I doubt if he killed anybody, okay? So he probably saw plenty of death and destruction along the way, but it's not something that he wanted to volunteer and say, look what we did. As a matter of fact, I found that with a lot of veterans. They're not interested really in telling you what the glory things were and the gory things are. They were there for a mission, they accomplished their mission, and they were happy to be home. So happy so much that I'm sure that my dad got home somewhere around September the 20th or so of 1945.
And you were born 9 months later?
I was born in June 25th, 1946. I'm sure
that happened about a few million times.
There's a lot of 1946 clients out there. As a matter of fact, I was looking at some stuff on our client list today, and there's at least 2 of them that are born within, 2 women clients that were born within 10 days of me, on either side of me. Their dads must have done the same thing.
Yeah, well, it makes sense. And it's something I've thought about, too, because and hopefully we never will, but we've had wars since then. We still have war of some sort going on now, but that size of how it impacted the U.S. and the world at large, hopefully we never have to do that again. But to end that, and for those guys that were on a mission, told what to do every day, put their head down and did it, to come back and then have to figure out normal life, that seems like a huge challenge.
Well, those times were a challenge. When they came back, there was a huge unemployment problem. all the GIs got discharged and they were looking for jobs. My dad was fortunate that he was good at selling, so he found sales jobs. But I think early on, one of his sales jobs was literally just driving around a Pepsi Cola truck. And, and then gradually, as time rolled on, he moved into higher levels of sales jobs. But he was in sales his entire life.
So you lived in Norfolk for like all your grown up years?
Norfolk was my home from birth till about 1963. In June, that summer, my parents moved to Goldsboro, North Carolina. So I went to elementary school, junior high school, and high school at a place called Norview, Virginia. It's not Norview, Virginia. It was a section of Norfolk. And it was a relatively new section because it experienced then what a lot of cities like Raleigh are experiencing now. There's just so much growth. Mm-hmm. They're taking over all the farmland. So we had a house that used to be on a farm right there in the middle of Norfolk right now. So I've spent all my years there.
Gotcha.
And then after they moved to Goldsboro, North Carolina, I finished high school there.
What grade were you when you moved?
I moved between my junior and senior year.
Did you really?
Yes.
I thought it was late, but was that hard?
It was. It was kind of a torn between staying in Norfolk or then going to Goldsboro with my parents. They had arranged for me to stay with some friends.
You had the choice?
And it was my choice, but it's like hard to make a choice like that. So I went with the family. And so I don't regret it, but there are people that I knew since elementary school that I kind of left behind, have never seen again. So I think if I had graduated with them, I might have kept in touch, whatever.
Yeah, I would imagine so. That last year probably made...
Yeah, it was a little difficult breaking into the culture of a new school because all the cliques have already developed at that time, so you were the outsider. So there were a bunch of us outsiders, though. Now, Goldsboro, has Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, so they're always rotating people in and out of there. So Goldsboro probably had, when I went there, probably had a lot more of us transients than a place like here in Raleigh. So a number of us became friends and still kind of halfway keep up with a couple of them.
Okay. Why did they choose to move at that point?
Dad had a business opportunity. Some of the friends he had in Norfolk were in restaurant equipment business, and there was an opportunity in Goldsboro to buy a restaurant equipment business. And he was a good sales guy. So they bought it, and he was a part owner of the business and moved down there, and he enjoyed his career doing that, running that business. And he ended up retiring from that business much sooner than I'm getting ready to retire.
Well, you like what you're doing. So
yeah, I do. I like what I'm doing.
It's something I think about, by the time I got to the end of high school, like there's certain stories or things that we materialize in our head or believe about ourselves. And with you having been in basically the same town almost your whole life, was there, like, when you think about if you could put into one sentence what you believed about yourself by the end of your high school years, does anything come to mind?
Well, things just kind of fell in place for me most of the time. I was not the best student in the world, but I was intelligent enough that I could have been the best student in the world if I had the drive. One of the things I was interested in was music. And when I was in the sixth grade, I was introduced to the trumpet, and I liked it a lot, and I felt like I could play it and practice and did okay. So in the seventh grade is when you could join the middle school band. So I went to the band director and said, I'd like to play trumpet in your band. He said, well, we'd like to have you. However, we have too many trumpets. So if you want to get in the band, you'll have to play something else. I said, okay, what else can I play? He says, well, you can play the sousaphone. Now, you know me right now. I'm 6'2", weighed about 185. But when I was in the seventh grade, I was more like about 5'2", maybe less, and weighed about 130, 40 pounds, you know. And the sousaphone, as most everybody knows, is that big, gigantic tuba thing that wraps around your body.
Oh, okay.
And when I carried that thing in parades, I was almost dragging the ground with the bass, with part of it. But anyway, I got into band. I played the sousaphone for 2 years, and then I got in the high school band. They were happy to have me. And I just loved playing that so much so that I tried out for the All-State Band as a freshman in high school, just not thinking I would do anything at all. And sure enough, I made it. They actually put me in an All-State Band. I was the only one from our band that got in it.
Wow.
And so when I was a sophomore, I tried out again. Sure enough, they put me there again. So I guess I was pretty good.
Yeah.
And we used to go, as the band would always play at every football game. We'd have a halftime show, and of course we'd start the thing with the national anthem. And to this day, my wife says, when I hear the national anthem, I can play the bass part. I'll be humming it or whatever, and I know all the bass parts. So.
Yeah.
But I did keep up with music all the way through the remainder of high school and into college. When I got to college, they didn't need any tuba players, they needed French horn players. So I decided that I could play a French horn. I learned how to play that, wow. And I played that for a year. And I think maybe later on we'll get into this, but I ended up, when I went in the Air Force a couple of years later, tried out for the Drum and Bugle Corps, and I made that and got some special privileges as a result of that. So,
okay.
And I still love music. I still have a trumpet, so every now and then I'll pull it out and play with it.
So even though you didn't get to play the trumpet in the band, you eventually found your way back?
I got a trumpet.
All right.
It's a very nice one.
So did you do Boy Scouts or anything, stuff like that?
Boy Scouts, no. I actually, well, I'll qualify that. Did Cub Scouts. Really enjoyed Cub Scouts. It was fun getting started. Got into the Boy Scouts, and I think the first rank you got was tenderfoot, and that's as far as I got.
Okay.
I didn't care much for camping, to be honest with you. I still don't. I know this is totally different than your thoughts, but
yeah,
I love camping.
It's funny. I've got a friend, and we were talking about the outdoors, and he said his description of himself is that he's an avid indoorsman. I don't know if you necessarily fit that bill, but the outdoors isn't for everybody.
No, my idea of camping, and my wife agrees with me on this, is we actually used to go camping together when we were newly married, or maybe not quite married, but close to it. And every camping trip I had, it was always something went wrong. My dad piled us all in a car one time. He thought we should go up to a park in Virginia called Ferrystone Park. I think we basically drive to like Roanoke and go up in the woods there somewhere, and you got the mountains, they're beautiful. Mm-hmm. But he puts the tent up, and then the tent leaks, and basically it's raining like crazy the whole weekend. My brother and I asked him if we could sleep in the car, and he let us do that. So we slept in the car the 2 days, and we went back, and I didn't want to camp anymore. Well, fast forward to when Barbara and I decided to go down to Myrtle Beach camping. We got a tent and pitched it right out there on the beach. And then, sure enough, a thunderstorm comes through about 3 o'clock in the morning, blows the tent down. We get soaking wet. We ended up sleeping the rest of the night in the car. When the daybreak came, the storm went away. We piled the stuff in the car, drove to the IHOP, had some pancakes, and drove home.
Was that the last time you went
That was
camping?
The last time I went camping in the tent.
Oh, that's sad.
So we did go camping, though. We figured a way to do it that we both enjoyed. So we ended up buying a motorhome.
Okay. You had a motorhome?
Yeah.
Like Cousin Eddie style motorhome?
It wasn't the gigantic. Well, it was not too far from Cousin Eddie's. It was a mini, but it was enough that you could seat about eight or 10 people.
Okay.
My wife's dad was avid wolfpacker and loved to go tailgating, and he figured out that he could use a motorhome, and so we went halvesies with him. He bought half the motorhome, we bought the other half. He used it to go to NC State games to party before and after the games, and we used it to go camping.
That's pretty cool.
So we kept it for a while. Then we realized that the motorhome's just nothing more than a big bucket where you throw money in and it burns it up and goes away. So that was the end of our experiences with camping.
Gotcha.
I was technically in the Scouts for a while. And then you've heard about my music stuff. That's kind of what my boyhood was about. Other than you mentioned earlier about playing war. Every kid growing up in the early 50s probably was playing war all the time.
Okay.
We'd get sticks and shoot each other. We'd build foxholes and all of that. And we were the glory of the World War II.
Yeah. So back to the question that I asked a minute ago, by the time you got to the end of high school, what was kind of the overarching theme that you saw yourself or believed about yourself?
Yeah, early on in high school, I thought I would like to be a fighter pilot, fly off of aircraft carriers. Norfolk was heavy with Navy people, and our neighborhood had at least 3 or 4 people all the time that were Navy families.
And you saw the planes
and so,
taking off, landing.
I saw them. Not only that, but I got to go out and touch them. One of our neighbors from across the street was a pilot flying off of carriers. One time, he invited my brother and myself to go out on the carrier.
Oh, wow.
And they had some type of dinner. It was really cool. He was dressed in his formal white uniform. And we were dressed up in the only sports coats we had with a tie. Took us out there, and they had this really great dinner, carving roast beef. I mean, we were in a very affluent family. It was kind of unusual for us to ever see anything like that. But it was a wonderful buffet, and we got a chance to walk around the carrier. And I saw planes flying around all the time, helicopters, planes. Another neighbor flew a seaplane. It was kind of an odd thing to see, but their plane landed on water. And he took us out and we sat in the cockpit of that. So I thought that was cool. My uncle, by the way, I didn't know if you knew that or not, but my uncle was a graduate of the Naval Academy.
No, I didn't know that.
And while I was in elementary school, he was stationed in Norfolk on a destroyer. So he took us on the destroyer. So, I mean, that time, you know, the military wanted people like to bring their kids out. Mm-hmm. Hey, these are future Navy people.
Recruits.
And I grew up in a Navy town, and it's like, that's what you're all about. You pulled for the Naval Academy to beat Army all the time, and sometimes they did. Sometimes they did.
So at what point, or did you try at some point to get into the Navy?
What happened was, in high school, I wanted to be an aviator and a naval aviator. And I realized early on that with my eyesight, that would never happen because I started losing, not bad. My vision's not bad. It's just about the same as today as it was then, but still not the sharp 20/20 you need to see when you're flying an airplane. Mm-hmm. And so there's no way I would have qualified under rules at that time. So I kind of felt I would do something after high school, but I wasn't sure. So after graduating from Goldsboro High School, I ended up going to Campbell College because everybody should go to college. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think I should have gone to college. The community
weren't quite ready for that.
Yeah,
huh?
The community college system wasn't in place then. I graduated in 1964, and I don't remember any community colleges in Goldsboro around then. They were starting to get the concept in North Carolina that community colleges were a good thing, but they weren't available then. So I went to Campbell College, and as I said earlier, I didn't know what to do there, so I joined their orchestra and started playing the French horn. That's what I did in my first semester there and throughout the first year I was there. But I wasn't the best student. I'd not been on my own ever before, so I got distracted all the time. There are a lot of squirrels there, Josh. Josh, people need to know that if a squirrel goes by the office window, I'm usually going to look at the squirrel, no matter what's
Mike
happening.
literally and metaphorically chases squirrels multiple times a day with being distracted. So
yeah, that's true. But anyway, I wasn't the best student, but I got distracted by being, well, here's some really pretty girls. They probably needed me to go out and hang out with them. And here's some other things. So
some other things.
Yeah.
We'll leave it at that.
But that summer, I had a job, worked in something at home, and then went back to school. While I was in school the first year, I'd never seen a college soccer game before. Campbell had a soccer team, and they played in I guess now would be a Division III league. They're much better now. They apply playing a higher league. But I saw that game being played, and I said, this looks like a really cool game. I'd like to play that sometime. And so here I am, a musician, never really played anything, never really did much of a team sport. And I set as a goal for myself, I want to try it for the team. That summer, I'd go to work, and I'd come back home, and I had bought myself a soccer ball, and I trained myself. So when I showed up at Campbell the following semester, for the fall semester, I tried out for the team, and the coach put me on the team.
Oh, wow. You'd never played soccer before in your life?
No. And not because I was skillful. By that time, by the way, you remember the short tuba guy, I grew into pretty much the size I am now, 6'2", about 180. And that's kind of an intimidating size for a soccer player. Mm-hmm. Now, the coach that time was not a trained soccer coach. He was a track coach. So they put him in charge of the soccer team. But he liked me because he liked my size. And I could run pretty fast. I had long legs. And once I got about 2 steps, I could be almost at top speed.
Yeah.
Not like some professional athletes that are top speed with the first step. Mm-hmm. It took me 2 or 3 to get going, but I could usually run people down or run over them. He liked that part of it. So anyway, I played soccer for Campbell, and I learned what it's like to be a college athlete. And that's probably what was my demise, because you're tired all the time. Mm-hmm. You're either traveling to a game, or you're playing for a game, or you're training for a game. Guess what you got to do? You still have to go to class and study. Mm-hmm. And so going to class was something I could do. I showed up for the practices, showed up for the games, but you
forgot the
actual
studying
part was the one. And some of the classes I took were probably wrong for me. I mean, it's like college level chemistry or crazy things like that. Engineering. I started in the engineering curriculum. It was just too much for me. So I didn't realize that. And whoever was my advisor gave me bad advice.
I would say so.
So anyway, by that time, it was of course, this is the Vietnam era when they were drafting people like crazy. So if you were asked not to come back to college, first thing they were required to do was turn you into the selective service. Said he's no longer in college, go ahead and draft him.
Was that pretty much guaranteed?
Yeah, pretty much. There was no lottery at that time. Everybody was going to be turned in. You could be exempt from the draft if you were married with a kid or something like that, or you got a disability, or you got medically not fit.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to say I wasn't fit because I just played a full season of soccer running full speed, so I didn't get out for that, and I wasn't married. So anyway, I got drafted. And by the time I got drafted and I went for my physical here in Raleigh, I passed the physical in flying colors, and then they told me that said, okay, we'll tell you what you want to be. Your picks are going to be go through the Army or go to the Marines. So both the Army and the Marines were training up, and then the first thing they were doing was sending me to Vietnam. Mm-hmm. That was 1966. So decided to check out the Navy and check out the Air Force before I actually had to go report for duty. Mm-hmm. And I found out that the Air Force had a delayed enlistment plan. So I took advantage of the delayed enlistment plan. They did require you to take an aptitude test. They had four areas, the administrative, mechanical, electronics, four different areas that they were testing for, and I scored in the highest percentile on all four.
Oh, wow.
So they told me, well, since you scored so well, we'll let you pick your specialty, which I thought that was a good idea. Mm-hmm. So my specialty I said, well, they've got missiles in the Air Force. I can learn about electronics. And guess where missiles are? Missiles are located in North Dakota and Montana, and that's the underground missile silos that they had with the ICBMs. Mm-hmm. So they assigned me that, and when I got into basic training, I was sent to Denver for technical training, and that's where I realized that they also flew missiles on fighter aircraft.
Oh, crap.
So they trained me up on that. But I did learn huge electronics as they were at the time, and all about airframes and warheads and rocket motors and the airframes and what it's like to maintain these missiles. And so anyway, that's kind of where I started my Air Force career.
Was it hard not to opt to go into the Navy?
Yeah, it was. But then I realized I don't really like being on ships. And so aircraft carriers are still a ship. Mm-hmm. And if you've seen video of them in a storm, you'd know that they get bounced around pretty heavily, just like a destroyer. And there's no guarantee that what you're going to be in. So,
yeah.
Plus the Air Force pretty much, I think, had the best conditions of all the services. I mean, you're not sleeping in a submarine with three people sleeping on top of you. Air Force pretty much always had a dormitory situation. We had that in most of our cases. So that's kind of rambling along about changing goals and what happens. Mm-hmm. So my goals kind of changed again. Maybe I'm going to be an Air Force career man. So I was an enlisted man, but they had opportunities for enlisted people to go for officers, to go to Officer Training Corps, and I knew I could probably get qualified for that.
Did you do that?
No, I didn't try for that. What happened was I got stationed in the Philippines. My duty stations were training in Denver, Colorado, Lowry Air Force Base. And then I was sent to Phoenix area at Luke Air Force Base in Glendale for basically on-the-job training. And then once I was through that, 13 months later, I was sent to the Philippines for 18 months. In the Philippines, we supported what's called the Air Defense Command. The Air Defense Command was responsible for protecting the bases and the airspaces. Air Defense Command was all over the United States, too. They had what they call alert barns where they keep these fighter aircraft, and their job was to be scrambled and intercept any incoming bombers. And so they had to be ready to go at any time. We had to make sure the missiles that they flew would work.
Okay.
So I was stationed, as I said, in about 18 months in the Philippines with that duty. And then after that, my friend Mike and me decided, well, we can extend our tour, our 4-year commitment, a little bit longer to take a tour in Vietnam. And thinking that, well, if you go to Vietnam, you get your rank a little faster. And then if we were to re-enlist, we would be that much further up the line for higher ranks. So both of us went to Vietnam. He got stationed in Da Nang, and I got stationed in Cam Ranh Bay.
I didn't know you opted for that.
Yeah, Mike English is my friend from the Philippines, and we lived together for that full 18 months. And then we ended up at 2 different bases in Vietnam, and ultimately his base they changed their duty, their mission, and my Cam Ranh Bay group changed their mission, And they sent us both to be at a place called Phuket, which was a much smaller base than the other two. But we had a totally different mission here. We were supporting basically F-4 Phantoms that were flying either in the South Vietnam or sometimes in North Vietnam. And they were flying all sorts of missions. They were bombers. They could be interceptors. They could be missiles that destroyed radar sites. They could shoot down airplanes. They could drop cluster bombs. I mean, that was a very versatile aircraft. So that's what we did when we finished our careers.
Were you in active danger, or was it a stressful job to work on that?
Well, at any moment, if you're not, and this goes all the way back to Luke Air Force Base, if you don't do something right according to the way they tell you to do it, and the manuals are there, and you could blow yourself up. As a matter of fact, when we were at Luke, we didn't participate in this, but our missile shop was towards the end of the runway, and I witnessed 2 F-100s taking off one day. They have a way of taking off. One plane would be slightly behind the other, would be the wingman, and they take off in pairs. And what happened was something happened almost as if when they were getting ready to rotate off the runway into the air, one of them basically turned over. I think something happened. He lost power or something, turned into the other one. Both planes crashed. One of the pilots was killed. But we got a chance to witness what happens because the Air Force has a rescue helicopter. And it's really kind of a strange-looking aircraft, but it has these 2 rotors. And they're built that way so that when they hover over a downed airplane and there's flames coming up, they'll actually fan the flames away from the cockpit so that they can send a rescue person down and get that pilot out of there.
Oh, wow.
It's really amazing to watch that happen. Of course, it's very risky for the helicopter, too. But anyways, there's risk all over the place. I told you about my dad training mission, losing an eye.
Yeah.
Well, any one of us could have been blown up if we didn't do something right. So, and here's another thing is that when we were in the Philippines, there's actually a missile that we had that was a nuclear missile. I mean, the warhead was nuclear.
Oh, wow.
Back in those days, when the Russians were going to come in and attack our country, they would have mass numbers of bombers coming. It wouldn't be 1 or 2. It'd be like 20 or 30. Mm-hmm. So the nuclear warhead was the right solution for that. You send your interceptor up, and you launch one of those nuclear missiles. It's not a giant warhead, but it's enough to blow the entire formation out of the air. And we exploded that thing.
Did you work on that?
I didn't work specifically on that. I worked with guys who worked on it. I was cleared for that. I mean, I carried a top secret security clearance.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, when I was applying for this specialty, I got word later on that there were FBI agents back in Norfolk, Virginia, and I hadn't been there while they were asking about what I was like in high school.
Oh, my gosh.
That I used to mutilate cats or something. So I got a clean bill of health from the FBI.
Wow. Yeah, that's unnerving. But
You want to go back, you want to know about my experience in Vietnam. Was I ever at risk?
Yeah.
And the answer was yes and no. The risk was always there for blowing ourselves up with a warhead or a rocket motor or something. But there was occasions where we would be rocketed by the Viet Cong. And they weren't very accurate with their rockets. They would be toting these rockets through the rice paddies in the mountains for days and days and days, and they'd set them up outside the base somewhere, maybe miles outside the base, and they describe it like they take off like a tree branch with a fork on it.
Are you serious?
And they kind of lay the missile between it and say, well, I think that's the right aim, and they light it up and run away. And sometimes they'd hit something. So we got rocketed a few times, Cam Bay. Now Mike and Da Nang got rocketed frequently, but still it was not frontline duty.
Yeah.
When we got up to Phuket, they actually brought in some mortars one time. We got mortared one time, and that was scary. And what happened was in Phuket, we were fortunate enough to have a group, a battalion or something of Republic of Korea troops. Mm-hmm. They were there specifically to guard our base.
Okay.
But something slipped up that time and they got through. But those guys, I think they must have cleaned all the enemy out after that, because we never had a problem after that. And they are notorious fighters.
So explain the difference between a mortar and a missile being shot at the base.
Well, a rocket is basically just a long tube with a warhead on the top, and you fire it off, and it could be 6 or 8 or 10 feet long, And the mortar, on the other hand, is more like fireworks you see out there at the fairgrounds.
A little more accurate.
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's much more accurate because they have a way of, still, when you first fire your first mortars, you're seeing where they land, and you can then adjust for the next, you can hit buildings with it. Gotcha. And they actually, when I was there, they came close to hitting the chapel where we had church services. They were right outside that. So I did tell you, there was one story, though, that when we got mortared, is that they tell you that if you're in your barracks, that you should, if you hear the siren going off and you hear those crunches coming in, get underneath your bunk. And I did that. I mean, I was in the top bunk, and so we hunkered down under the bunk, and then I did. And then when the all clear was given, I couldn't get out from under the bunk.
Why?
Because I had so much adrenaline going. I got under this little bar that's between the metal bar that's real close to the ground.
You couldn't get back out?
They had to kind of lift the edge of the bed up to get me out.
It's like a magic trick.
That's right. I wasn't expecting that, but I was glad to have that bed on top of me.
Yeah. Was that, maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but when you acclimated back into the real world, were those experiences difficult to leave behind, or did any of that kind of haunt you for a while?
No. As I told you, I think the Air Force has, except for the pilots, they're the most at risk. And then they also have some rescue people that are heavy risk. But the rest of us do everything to support those guys. Yeah. From the people who fuel the planes to the people who screw in the avionics to test out those things, or the people like us who put the munitions on. We put rockets, we put missiles on. We didn't put them on the planes. We sent them down to the flight line, and they had loaders that specifically knew how to do that. We check them out, check the rocket motors, make sure the warheads work, make sure the guidance systems work. If the airframe was not looking pretty good, then you'd have to pull some parts off and put some new parts on. So it's really a mechanical and electronic job along with explosives. And they'd fly these things, these missiles on these airplanes at 600 miles an hour or 800 miles an hour or at 900 miles an hour. And a lot of the stuff can fall off of them. So when you come back from the flight line, if they didn't use them, you'd have to check them out and make sure they're working again. And the last thing you wanted to hear was an F-4 pilot got behind a MiG and shot his Sidewinder, and it didn't work. That's the worst thing that can happen. Yeah. So we had to really work hard to make sure our stuff was going to work. Yeah. And that was a very challenging job, very rewarding.
Yeah, I would think so. So I'll ask you the same thing that I did about getting to the end of high school, but by the time you got through that, you had become an accomplished at your role and probably done things that you had no idea you were capable of doing. What was the overarching theme or thing that you believed about yourself at that point?
It seems like it was nothing more than just you could do stuff. You just didn't know you could do it. Yeah. Okay. And then once you trained, if you worked at it hard enough, you learn how to do these very complicated jobs and very almost dangerous jobs. Yeah. And then once I had that, I decided that at the end of my tour in Vietnam, I decided that I was going to not stay in the Air Force. I'd go find a civilian career. And I think I made a good move there. So I'm set a new goal. So I'm going to get out. I'm going to go to a local community college in Goldsboro and just see if I know how to study and learn and process.
Yeah. So you're how old at that point?
I was 24 years old when I got out of the Air Force.
So at 24, would you say somebody that was very goal-oriented, like these things that you just have talked about, were they specific goals that you set and accomplished, or were you just kind of going to the next thing?
No, I actually, when I got in the Air Force, I really wanted to pursue a career possibly. I wanted to make sure that, but the more I learned about the Air Force, the military in general, I realized that I would probably be okay as a long-term career, but I really wanted a little more than just that. Okay. That's the reason why I got out.
So was it, by the time you made that decision, was it an easy decision, or how did you decide that you didn't want to make a career out of it?
Here's probably the deciding factor. At the very end of my I call it career, but my Air Force commitment, I'd spent about 4.5 years in the Air Force. I was getting out, or I could have gotten out, or I could have reenlisted. I had achieved the rank of E5, which is a staff sergeant. There's only the highest you can go in the Air Force as a enlistment is E9. So I was 4 away from that, from doing the highest you could get, only in 4.5 years. Yeah. So if I had a 20-year career, I could probably get pretty high. Well, there was a guy in our missile shop who had was one rank ahead of me. He was already on his second or third tour, and yet he was the one that was responsible for my fitness report. And he had written something, and I got a chance to look at the fitness report. He had written something in there that would never go away, and I don't exactly remember, but it was not flattering for me. And I said to myself at that time, if this guy can do this to my career, I don't want to be around these guys anymore. I said, there's just no reason for me to be part of this. Yeah. I've got a better chance outside where there's more things in free enterprise. And so left the Air Force, went home, decided to live with parents for a while, went to community college, and that's where I learned that there are the 4 or 5 things that you need to do well in college.
Go to class, study, don't get distracted.
Yeah. You basically go to class, study for the test, take the test.
Such a small detail.
That's right. And then it helps to have a good counselor. And so when I was at Wayne Community College, I actually went in and talked to a counselor. I said, I'm here out of the Air Force. I'm starting to make decent grades. I'm in this college transfer program, but I really don't want to know what I want to do and what I want to transfer. So you have any help for that? You're a counselor. And they said, well, we have a battery of tests you can take, and then we'll see where you stand and see where your interests are. So I took a test that says where your interests lie. And so it says you would do well in business, accounting, and a couple other business type things. Didn't have brain surgery on there, so I stayed away from that. But it did say, they did mention that accounting was maybe something you excel in. And he said, by the way, that one of the more famous accountants there is a guy named Bob Newhart.
Is he really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
He's an accountant by training. You can kind of get that from his dry sense of humor, right?
Yep.
So anyway, so I decided to finish my Associate of Arts degree, which I have a degree, a real piece of paper, and transfer up to one of the accounting schools. I think I told you this earlier. I'd actually wanted to go to UNC, but UNC told me that they had one of the few accounting programs at the time I wanted to go. And they said, we'd love to have you, but we can't take you right now because we're full. However, some of our professors are helping start up a program at NC State, and they'll be over there and teaching. You might want to go to see if you can get in there. And sure enough, I went over there, got in there, started taking the accounting program. By that time, I was deeply involved with my wife-to-be, Barbara, and I didn't tell you this, but she was a teacher at Goldsboro High School at the time I was gotten out of the Air Force. And so I fell in love with her, and we both decided to move back to Raleigh, where she was born and raised and still had family. So we started our lives together when we were at NC State. She, on the other hand, decided to give up teaching and also pursue the same accounting program I did.
Oh, okay.
So that's how both of us became accountants.
I don't know that I've ever asked you this, but how did you guys meet?
We were introduced by some mutual friends. I had met a guy who was from Smithfield. He was married, beautiful. He had a beautiful wife. And he was just a really fun guy to be around. And so we would go play golf and we'd do things, and I was, having fun. And then one day we were out playing golf and came back, and I think I dropped him off at his house. His house wasn't far from where my mom lived. They asked me if I'd like to stay for dinner. They had Barbara was there visiting them. Barbara was a close friend of his wife. She was a school teacher too. So at that time I said, well, maybe I'd like to stay. Is Barbara's going to stay? And they said, yeah, she's been invited too. So I said, well, I'll be back in a little bit. I went home, took a shower, told Mom, I'm not eating dinner with you tonight, Mom. And went right back, and the rest is kind of history.
The rest is history.
We became best friends, and everything else that goes with being married. We weren't married that soon. We got married a couple of years later. But anyway, that's how we met, and
that's cool.
That's why we back in Raleigh. We both are accountants, and she pursued a different type of career pattern than I did. But that's how we got into the accounting program.
Okay. So I could venture a guess at this, but what do you think the main thing that you learned from being in the Air Force, and then maybe answer that the same way about refocusing and finishing your college degree too?
Well, the Air Force basically is regimented. I mean, it's just like any other military service. It's not like the Marines. They're not going to be talking Semper Fi all the time, and Army guys are hoorah all the time. But we still have some discipline that we adhere to, and you got to be on your job. You got to do your job. They want to make sure you did your job. Your job is very technical, so they wanted to make sure your brain was working, not necessarily if you could run 20 miles and do 100 push-ups. So I learned discipline. I learned to be on time. I learned to do your job and do it right. And then basically that I was able to take that from the Air Force and then apply that to everything else I did. So when I got to NC State, even though the courses were much harder than that community college, still hunkered down, made the grades I had to make to graduate. And then one thing that happened was along the way is I had so many college credits by the time I got ready to graduate. One of the things I had to do was take accounting classes in sequence. I couldn't double up. They wanted me to, so I ended up spending a lot more time at NC State than I expected. I was there for 3 years. And along the way, I took all sorts of courses and extra things like business management and economics and then accounting. So I ended up practically a triple major.
Oh, wow.
It's almost, I know I had at least enough hours to be at least a master's degree. So, but anyway, took the courses. And of course, one of the things I did was Christmas or in the summer, I worked for a construction company. And I learned a lot about construction too. Jackhammers or standing on roofs or carrying up buckets of concrete.
That's hard
flights.
work.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yep.
But I learned a little bit of carpentry along the way too. It was kind of fun.
Yeah, I don't know if this was your experience, but I had a summer in college where I worked manual labor the entire summer. It's the best shape I've ever been in, probably ever. It was outdoors. I loved it. But by the end of the summer, I was recommitted to finishing college and pursuing a career that used my brain and not my body. And I'm glad I did that, but that was kind of an invaluable experience.
It was, and I think Air Force helped me a lot in that way. I'm not so regimented right now because I don't know, I'm just more of a casual person. Yeah. But I still have a lot of those things that I learned, and I think they subconsciously work for me all the time.
Yeah, I came along in your life story even further past what you've even gotten to at this point. I think you were probably in your 50s by the time you and I met. But, piecing all this together, and when I met you, you were running a very successful CPA firm with multiple staff and operations. And I don't think those things happen just because. Where I'm going with that is I think maybe some of the discipline and structure that you took out of the Air Force allowed you to build operations within a business to allow it to succeed.
Yeah, you're right about that because, as I mentioned earlier, my job in the Air Force was basically to do these things and do them right the first time. And so a lot of those concepts you could apply to most any business. Yeah. And if you want to be successful, you just try to excel at some of those things. One of the things I've been fortunate along the way is I've just seemed to have just a natural talent, if you want to call it that, just to engage people and just to get to know them and understand what their needs are and to try to help them. And so along the way, I think part of any business is finding the customers and making the customers happy. And so if you can keep them happy, they'll tell everybody else they know, and they'll tell everybody else they know, and you can build a pretty decent business. Yep. It wasn't always that way. When I first got out of college, I was working for another firm, my first firm, and I worked there for 6 years. And one of the hardest things that I had to do was turn him down for being a partner in the firm. Because one of the partners there was a great partner for developing business. He just had to have people around him to do the business. And that was me. So, and other people that were there. I wasn't alone. But when it came right down to it, there were 3 partners in the firm, and 2 of the 3 partners they're all good friends. I love them all. But 2 of the 3 partners were just salt of the earth type people, and the 3rd partner was kind of on the edge of stuff. And, accounting is basically rules and regulations, and taxes is the same thing. So I don't mind trying to find a way to apply the tax law in favor of my clients, but sometimes this guy was going a little off the wall. So when it came time for them to offer me the partnership, I said, I really don't think I want to be in business with all 3 of them. I'll take 2 of them and not 3. And how do you tell them, okay, kick this guy and I'll join? It doesn't work. So I left the firm. And I left the firm on good terms. I said, first of all, I left like May after. I said, I'll work for this tax season for you. I know I don't want to leave you short, so I'll go ahead and help you through the tax season. But on May the 1st, I'm leaving. I'm going to start my own business. And so, and I said, the other thing is, I'm not going to even try to steal your clients. Okay. If they come to me on their own, then I'll accept them. But I'm not doing anything, send out a lot of letters.
This is probably before non-competes were a
that's
thing.
Exactly what it was. I said,
I'm more an ethical decision than anything.
Yeah, I just decided that, a lot of people, they want to come, they'll know where I am.
Yeah.
So what happened is a lot of people did leave. And some of those clients, including some very large businesses, are still our clients.
Yeah.
And part of it's just basically staying in touch and making sure things are going well for them and having enough interest in their business to learn what complications they have in running it and what their challenges are and see if you can help them through it.
Yeah.
So again, if you could say the Air Force did anything for me, that's probably what it did more than anything else, is try to stay engaged, make sure you do things right and do it right the first time.
Yeah. I think you'll agree with this, and anybody that's listening that has had anything to do with running a business, it ain't for the faint of heart.
No.
There is a very legitimate reason why the majority of small businesses fail, usually within 3 to 5 years, because it gets to a point where it's a grind. It loses its luster. It takes a discipline that most people don't have. And even with the discipline, it still may not work.
Right.
So I think that says a lot about your character, both the fact that you stuck with it and the way in which you stuck with it, not to try to harvest your business out of somebody else's business. But I think it's one of the things that I've always felt really fortunate about crossing paths with you, is because you're not the typical CPA, right? Personality wise and mindset. Maybe I'll make any CPA that's listening to this not happy with me about this, but I think the stereotype is fairly well earned that CPAs are good bean counters. They do a good job at that. But being a business owner is something entirely different. And I think I've always seen that you have an ability to generate business because you're so outgoing, you're so personable, and people feel cared for in like a genuine way.
Right.
I've repeated many times something you have said to me a long time ago, that if somebody would pay your hourly rate, you'd go wash the car for them. And I think you'd probably go wash the car for them even if they didn't pay your hourly rate. It's why we've got so many little old lady clients and people that have come to you because they know that they're going to be taken care of.
Yeah, my wife has a favorite story about me is that this is when we were in a different building. You remember the building we were in that was
on Oberlin?
Yeah, on Oberlin.
Yeah.
Right around the corner from Oberlin, there was some townhouses. And one of our old lady clients was living in one of those townhouses. And so she called me up one day and said, could you come over and help me do this and that? And I figured, okay, I just would come over. It wasn't too far out of the way, go over there. And it's just like typical of a lot of folks that are kind of hoarders, or especially the older folks, and I'm one of the older folks now, is that you go in the front door and immediately see on the dining room table, there's like stacks and stacks of stuff, there's papers and stuff all over the place. So I figured she wanted me to go through that and help her sort through that. Okay, I'll do that. But no, she says, I've got this. I was up in the attic the other day and I needed to bring this box down. Now, this woman's probably 85 years old. What in the heck is she doing in the attic? Okay. Mm-hmm. So I said, you're not going in the attic. Tell me what you're looking for. So I went up in the attic and rooted around in there and found what she needed, brought it down. And so that's just maybe an example of what I do and I was willing to do and still do. As we saw me hit today, I went and visited one of our elderly clients just to get a paper signed. So
and
she was happy to see me.
Those are things like there's no way in the world you're going to be able to bill that hour or two, and it didn't matter. But that she was going to be a client for life for you because you were willing to treat her like a human being, not a an object to generate revenue.
Exactly. And you find clients will come to you because word of mouth gets out. You don't have to advertise all day long and do social media and this and that. If you're just genuine and you just try to help people, and civic things that I did, I've done a number of things along the way. I was just like, I look back a little bit and say, I can't believe I did all this, but I got in the Raleigh JCs early on, figured I could meet people and generate business, and sure enough, I did. Some of our clients I met in the JCs back in the early 80s. That's a long time.
That was a long time ago.
And then, so I was active in the JCs. Of course, everybody knows you're a CPA. The first thing they want you to be is the treasurer. So I was the treasurer for a couple of years. And then my son-in-law was coming along, and he was about age 5 or 6, and he liked to play soccer. So I trained him a little bit on how to play soccer. I learned more about it. And next thing I know, I'm the soccer coach. And the next thing after that is that, hey, we hear you're a CPA. Would you like to be on the board of the Capital Area Soccer League? And sure enough, I got on the board. And so I'm coaching a team, running a CPA practice, on the board of that, going to JC's, very active, but didn't seem like I was very active. It just seemed like it was things I should be doing anyway. I kept being involved with my child, which was great. So meeting people all the way. And, one of our clients, he's no longer a client now, but he was a client not too long ago, was one of our soccer friends from way back when we started that Challenge League.
Yeah. And for anybody that doesn't know, the Capital Area Soccer League, now known as Castle, it's known as
they got a different name.
Name. It's one of the biggest in the country at this point.
Exactly.
You were a founding member or founding reason that got off the ground, and the structure that you guys put in place allowed it to flourish into what it is now, and it is a behemoth of an organization.
I was on the Capital Area Soccer League board before they had something called the Challenge League. So Dave Schonard and Bill Jertson, myself, got together. We figured out this. Those two guys figured it out more than I did. Bill Jertson was a brilliant man. Sadly, he's passed away. But Schonert and I and Bill organized this league where players who could not afford to be on these travel teams that would go to other states and other cities, they couldn't afford to be there, but they were good soccer players. So they needed a place to play within our county. So we formed this Challenge League where players actually had to try out, and you could cut players. And so we formed this league, and it's been highly successful. I think your daughter played in it.
It is a very big part of the soccer culture of this area. I mean, many teams for each age group, boys and girls.
So I was involved in that. And while I was in the JCs, I think you know a little bit about this, but the Raleigh JCs was able to acquire the franchise to run the Miss North Carolina pageant for the Miss America pageant. Now, a lot of people don't know about it, what the Miss America pageant is now, but back in the 80s, it was quite big, and it was very popular with a national TV audience, and whoever became Miss America had a really great contract to go around in parades and football games and all stuff, wear the crown and show off. And there were always these brilliant women who were very talented, and so Miss North Carolina was an official preliminary of that. And the JCs decided I should be the executive director one year. And so that was, talk about a challenge, that was a real challenge, because we had to manage at the state level about 60 or 70 local pageants. We had to make sure that they were being run properly and they were offering the right kind of scholarships. And then those women that would win those titles of the Miss Goldsboro or Miss Fayetteville, whatever, they'd come up to Raleigh, and for an entire week, they'd be going through competitions. And then Saturday night would be the finals. Saturday night finals was broadcast live throughout North Carolina on a network of about 7 TV stations from 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock. It was a tradition to watch the Miss North Carolina pageant in the summertime, and usually around June, late June. And basically, to make that work, you had to have official sponsors. And so guess what the executive director got to do? He got to go into the halls of the Wachovia Bank at the time, or Rose's stores, which is the equivalent of what maybe Target is now. Rose's was huge. A number of other large commercial establishments, and negotiate a TV contract. They're going to give us money to be the sponsor. So it's like, here I am, early 30s. So how am I going to do all this? Of course, we had a lot of help in managing this whole thing, and I got to be on the live TV.
Oh, wow.
I was announcing how proud we were of the girls and all this stuff, and I see the video, and I can't believe it. But anyway, and part of the responsibilities was to go to Atlantic City afterwards, and whoever won your year, you got to do that. So this is all happening very quickly during this period of time when I decided to leave the CPA firm and build my own firm. And next thing I know, we're building a larger firm, and we got to be 4 partners before it was over with, before I retired. And we had a nice book of business, and we were well known throughout the town.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting for me to hear all this and piece it together, because some of it you planned, some of the challenges you went towards intentionally, and other things and I hear this over and over in these conversations, it's like serendipity. Like you can't manufacture these things to happen, but you took a step into it. And
right.
So let's wrap up with saying, I'll ask you the question. This isn't a podcast about adventure, and that means somewhat wildly different things to different people. But I think it's about what are the challenges that we face and what do we learn about ourselves on the other side of that. Mm-hmm. So if you could summarize that in all the things that you've just spent the last hour talking about in your life, what do you think it boils down to that you learned most about yourself through all this?
Mostly that you can accomplish most anything if you just set your mind to it. If you go in different places in the world, stepping up to do jobs that you've been asked to do. I still do a lot of volunteer work. It's just like, it can be done. You have to focus on it. Mm-hmm. You have to really want to do it. Mm-hmm. But if you're going to do it, you have to do it right. And that's kind of what maybe one of my guiding principles are.
Yeah. So it's like an all-in mentality. If you commit to something, you're all in on that thing until you get it done.
Right.
I think, and that probably is like, we could probably draw a line back to your time in the Air Force and the things that you learned from that. But I would say also, like, the building blocks of coming out of that and having to put your head down and get through college after it not going well the first time, and then building off of that into a CPA career that took a turn in a way that you didn't expect it to, and then building on top of that. Right. And then fast forward, you came full cycle with the CPA firm and were able to, I would agree, retire from a very healthy business with good clients and kind of meaningful work. And I'm grateful that you're on the other side of the wall with me and the financial planning stuff, because I think it really does leverage the skills and character and things that you're just naturally good at without having to do the bean counting. Right.
What I take away from all of this is I'm still active. I'm still doing it. I'm not done yet. I still think I have things to do and to help people. You're deeply a big part of that whole process. You have all the technical skills and you have all the other things that's required to run a business. But I still have great relationships mm-hmm. with you and the other people that work here and all of the clients that we deal with. And it's just really fun being a part of it. And as long as my health holds out, then as long as you're willing to keep me around, then I plan on sticking around.
And I think that's a great way to end it, because I want to be able to say that when I get mm-hmm. to your age. Yeah. If you don't mind saying, how old are you right now?
Well, I'm 77, but I'm getting close to 78 in June. Remember, okay. I told you my birthday is June 25th. I know exactly when my dad got back from World War II.
Yeah. Yeah. So 77, 77's the new 60, because, I mean, your energy level and the things that you show up and do every day, you don't act like a 77-year-old. But I think that's the adventure mentality, though, is that age doesn't matter. Yeah. You're still looking for challenges. You're still looking for the things that are hard to do, and you're a constant learner. That's very obvious. So you can stick around as long as you want to, because I got a lot more to learn from you. But this has been fun. I hope it wasn't too uncomfortable for you, but it was really great for me, having known you for 2 decades, to put the whole arc of your story together and see how it all fits. And now it, like, in my mind, it all fits together. Like it makes complete sense.
Well, thanks for having me today, and it'll be interesting to hear how this sounds.
Okay. Yeah, I think everybody hates the sound of their voice when they listen to it, but this is going to be fun sending it out to, the podcast universe, but specifically to the people that know you best mm-hmm. to be able to hear this. I think that'll be really interesting to get their feedback. So appreciate you doing this.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks for listening. And I sincerely mean that, because I'm extremely grateful that you choose to spend this time with me. I don't take it for granted, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you want more content like this, be sure to check out material on my website at ridgelinewealthadvisors.com. That's advisors with an ORS. And sign up for my monthly newsletter, The Money Trail Guide, which you can find on the blog page. Until next time, I hope you pursue your own great adventure.